Hey there, welcome back. This time we're going to be taking a look at another productivity system. This is the bullet journal system by Carroll Ryder. So let's get right into it. Developed by this guy named Carroll Ryder in 2013. So it's 12 years old at this point, still a relative newcomer in the productivity space. You might have heard of it. It's a pretty common system now and nowhere near as famous as GTD or some of these other, like the Kanban board methodology, but it's definitely gaining in popularity. So what is the bullet journal system? Basically, it's a combination of planning, journaling, and reflecting in some sort of a notebook. And originally this was done in a paper notebook, but obviously now with digital tools, there are much better ways, at least in my opinion, to do this inside of a note-taking app like Workflowy. And one of the things that really sets this system apart is that it's been described kind of as a mindfulness practice disguised as a productivity system. We'll see that when we look at the little productivity system chart, that it is this interesting combination of taking notes, combining it with tasks, keeping track of events. It's just trying to put everything in one single space and not really separating things into, these are my tasks, so they go in my to-do list, and these are my notes, and they go in my journal. Everything is just mixed together in a much more organic and natural way. You're not switching from one different tool or application for each specific thing. They all just live together in one single notebook. So now let's take a look at some of the key ideas behind the bullet journal system. So the system was really designed to be quick to capture information. That's one of the main things. The creator calls rapid logging. And really, it's just a combination of writing down tasks, notes, events, and other things, and then using a very simple system of symbols to visually identify what is this? Is it a task? Is it a note? Is it an event? Is it something else? But it's not just putting things into one giant list. They are actually different sections, or what Carroll Ryder calls modules. Really, they're just different parts of the notebook that serve slightly different purposes to help you organize the information, because you are putting everything kind of mixed in. So it does help to organize these in some sort of a chronological way. And we'll take a look at what those are in just a moment. But also there are these things called collections, which is really just anything else that doesn't really fit into the modules that are described in the bullet journal system. So you can add these into your notebook for recipes or exercise routines or lists of your favorite websites and tools, whatever you can imagine. And then migration, which is really the only process that you have in the bullet journal system. It's a very natural, organic journaling type of a system. So there's not much process. It's not, for example, GTD, where there are very specific steps you have to follow. Bullet journaling does have a flow of what we call migration. It's really based more on chronology. So things that are due today go in the daily section, things that are due in the future go into section for that. Things that you're not going to do go into a different section. So it's more around time and when things are supposed to happen. Everything else, usually like notes and everything else that isn't a task or isn't an event and isn't tied to time in some way, like notes or quotes or whatever you add in there, really can just stay where it is. So that's really the only process part of the bullet journal system. And we'll look at that in just a moment. So how do we actually use it? So there are two main parts. The first part I already mentioned, which are the symbols. So bullet journaling, as the name implies, you do this in a journal or in a digital journal like this one here. And the way that we identify what all these things are inside the journal using these symbols. Now, these are modified and adapted based on the handwritten ones. Obviously, we're working in digital format, so you could turn these into tags, you could use colors, you could use emojis. It really doesn't matter, whatever makes most sense for you and whatever is easiest to type quickly. But these are the ones that the original paper-based bullet journal system uses. So we have our tasks. You could just leave it as a bullet or use a little checkbox. You could do this in all kinds of different note-taking applications. I'm just explaining how to do it in Workflow because that's what I'm already using here. It's the easiest and it works actually really well for bullet journaling. And then we have another one for events. You could use date tags. You could just put the date without it being a date tag, or to use an O to signify when something is an event. The original system uses a single dash to indicate that the item is a note, so you don't confuse it for a task or an event that's missing a date or something like that. Just to make it really clear that this thing is a note, no need to do anything else with it. For completing tasks, if you want to stick to the original system, you just use a little X. If you're using checkboxes like in Workflow or in some of these other note-taking applications, we've got checkboxes, so you could use that, and that's how you would mark a task as complete. Now, these last two are a little special. These are, I think, obvious. You've got tasks, you've got events, and you've got notes. These, however, are actually related to the modules, and they also help us visually figure out what happened during the day. So the paper system, for example, recommends a right-hand arrow to indicate that item has migrated to the following day. So as you can imagine, instead of just writing a list of tasks, and then you get to one and you don't complete it, or you run out of time or what have you, instead of just leaving it there and risking forgetting it, what you do is you mark it with a little right-hand arrow, and then you move it over to the next day. And so the idea behind that is you create a little paper trail for yourself. If you were doing this on paper or a digital paper trail of what actually happened to that task. So it's a lot harder to accidentally drop the ball and forget some things that you didn't complete. And it also forces you to be intentional about whether this is a thing that you actually want to do tomorrow, or maybe you ran out of time and then you also realized you didn't really need to do it. You might just cross it off. The other one we have that's a little special is this left-hand arrow, and that's for tasks that you've decided to do not today and not tomorrow, but sometime in the future. And so you mark them with a left-hand arrow, and that means they're either going to go into a section called the monthly log or the future log. And again, this is just a nice way to indicate what has happened to this task, to create a little flag for yourself in the future if you look back and see a thing and wonder, what did I actually do with this? Oh yeah, I moved it to the future log, or I crossed it off and decided I didn't want to do it, or I decided I was going to do it tomorrow. Did I actually do it? That kind of a thing. And so that's what the symbols here do. And so that's really it for the symbols. You could create your own, but these are the standard ones that are recommended for the bullet journal system. And this is the way you would do it if you were using paper. But again, we have a couple of different ways to indicate tasks and dates for events. So you might want to use those instead. But if you were doing it on paper, this is the way you would do it. Now let's move on to the different modules. These are the different sections of the notebook. So again, this was originally meant to be done on a paper notebook. So this first section here, the index, is the table of contents. To me, that doesn't make a ton of sense if you're doing it in a digital format. Obviously, depending on what application you're doing this inside of, if it's one that uses the concept of folders and pages and things like that, then you might actually need an index. But if you're doing it in something like Workflow, where it's just one single document, you don't actually need the index. And when I show you the demo in just a moment, you'll see why that is obviously not necessary. But basically, that's where you would list, if you were doing this on paper, my future log starts on page such and such, my monthly log starts on page such and such, just to help you remember, because as you start to fill out your journal, you'll have a lot of filled pages. It'll start to have a lot of less empty spaces, and it might become a little bit difficult to remember where each one of these sections starts. This is also going to be a bit more useful if you're also adding collections. If it's just these main sections, you might actually not even need the index. Even if you're doing it on paper, you could just add a sticky note to indicate where each of these sections starts. There's a couple of different ways to do it. But I'm just mentioning it because this is the way that the original creator recommends you do it. Next, we have the future log, which is like a big folder of things that you might want to do for the current year. Goals, activities, hobbies, things that you want to do sometime this year. Maybe not quite sure when. They could have a date, they might not, but it's just like a big bucket for the future. Basically, you're just labeling these things as sometime in the future. And so it's a section where you can put all those things until you're ready to decide a specific month or a specific day when you want to start to do them, or if they're just a one-day thing, when you would actually do them. Next, we have the monthly log. As you can imagine, this is your monthly calendar. And in the paper version, it would literally just be the list of all the days of the month, and then some spaces below that to allow you to put things like birthdays and parties and appointments and anything that has a specific date that it's going to happen on for the current month. And then we have the daily log, which is where you're going to be working most of the day, every single day. It's essentially just a running list of events, tasks, notes, anything that you want to capture for that day goes in a single page in the daily log. You can think of this as a hybrid between a to-do list, your journal page, and your notes page in one single thing. And lastly, we have collections, which, as I mentioned at the start, are optional. These are just for tracking other things like exercise metrics. Maybe you keep track of what books you're reading, what pages you're on, topics you're interested in, special projects, things that don't quite fit into these sections, which are really more around chronologizing tasks and events. So that's really it for the modules. As you can see, not many sections. It's really just a page that you're working from day to day. Then you're zooming out and looking at the entire month, any important events, tasks, or goals for that month. Zooming out a little bit further, and you get the future log, which are things that don't quite have a specific due date, but you know you want to do them. Let's say I know I want to renovate the roof in February, but I don't have a specific date. This is just a place to keep track of that. And then when I get to the month, I will look into the future log, figure out what things I wanted to do for the month, decide a day, and so on. It'll trickle down from the future log to the monthly log to the daily log. So this is just my big future things and goals bucket. And that's pretty much it. We just have the symbols and we have the modules. And so now I'm going to explain a little bit about how they work together. So if you're actually going to do it on paper, you would turn the first page in the journal or your notebook into the index page. And this is where you would just list out the different sections you're going to include, what pages do they start on, number the pages if they are not numbered in your journal. And that's pretty much it for the index page. So if you're doing this on paper or you're using an application that isn't nearly as flexible as Workflow, that maybe does have folders and documents, you would probably want to start with some sort of an index. In this case, it's the index of your journal. So you're going to list where all the different parts of your bullet journal are. And if you're doing this digitally, you probably just want to link them so you can click it and then it'll open up that section, kind of quickly access it. The next section you'd want to create is your future log. And as I mentioned, this is essentially what you're going to do for the year, any important events, activities, goals that you know you want to do. The next section you want to set up is the monthly log. And this is where everything for the current month goes. So again, any appointments, birthdays, events, anything that has a specific due date that falls within the current month, that's what goes into the monthly log. Next, we have our daily log, which is where we record our tasks, notes, and events for that day. This is our running to-do list. The daily log also, by the way, serves as our inbox. So if throughout the day we come across new tasks, things that are required of us, we want to take notes, we want to capture something, actually you would put these into the daily log and then you would use the symbols to indicate where they actually went. So let's say you get an email from your boss and he wants you to do a thing. You decide to do it tomorrow, you capture it just in the daily log, mark it with a little right-hand arrow, and then tomorrow you would create a new task with that item. Or if you decide you want to do it, let's say in 2 weeks, mark it with a little left-hand arrow, move it into the future log, or put it directly into the monthly log if it's for the current month, just give it a date. And then the last section you would create, or sections actually, in your bullet journal would be the collection. So any other additional things you want to keep track of or that you want to use your bullet journal for. Things around, let's say, health or travel or family, chores, anything like that. Or maybe you've got a hobby or a project that you're working on. You could also put them in the same bullet journal. Just put it under a collection. And then at the end of each month, you would just migrate the tasks, making sure that you are always looking at the current month and that the daily log always has the things you're supposed to be looking at for the current day. So now let's take a look at what that flow looks like at the start of each day. We're going to do just 2 things. The first one is going to be reviewing the monthly log to see if we have anything scheduled for the current day. If so, we're just going to create a copy in our daily log. And that's pretty much it. The next thing we would do is start working from the daily log, adding any tasks we're supposed to do, capturing any notes, events, and essentially just putting everything that's happening throughout the day into our daily log. And again, our daily log would serve as our inbox as well. So if any new information comes in, tasks, events, notes, things like that, capture them in the daily log. And then at the end of the day, you would sort those out. And so that's actually what you would do at the end of each day. You would go through your daily log and see if there are any either incomplete tasks or new tasks, and then decide where they go. So for example, if you want to do them for the following day, you would mark them with a little right-hand arrow. If you decide you want to do them sometime this month, but maybe not tomorrow, then you would move them to the monthly log. Or if you know they're important, but maybe you're not going to do them this month, then you would move them to the future log. And that's it. That's essentially what you do. This is the flow for each day. Start of each day. Is there anything in my calendar, my monthly log that I'm going to do today, or I need to do today, or I need to finish today? Put that into the daily log and then just start working from the daily log. So it's pretty simple. And then at the end of the day, just review to see if there are any tasks that need to be sorted into either tomorrow's daily log, the monthly log if you're going to do them this month, or the future log if you're going to do them sometime, but you're not quite sure when. And this is not just for tasks. This, of course, could also be for events, or if you remember that you need to do something, it's maybe not a task, you need to have a meeting or an appointment, you would also add them there in daily log, indicate with little arrows where they're supposed to go, and put them into the right section. And if you already have the due date, then you would just add that wherever you put them, either in the monthly log or the future log if it's for a month beyond the current month. And then at the start of each month, we're just going to do a little bit of housekeeping. The first thing we need to do is check the monthly log to see if there are any unscheduled items. So things go into the monthly log, not just if you have a specific due date. They go in there if you know you want to do them or have to do them in the current month, even if they don't have a due date yet. So you could just put them at the very top of the section. And then once they have a due date, cross them out and move them to the actual date that they're going to be due on. And so the reason we're checking each month is because they might be a couple of things in there that you thought you would get done this month, but maybe you didn't. So now is the time to, in the same fashion that you do it for the daily log and kind of indicate with a little arrow where they're going to go, you would do the same thing here and indicate if they're going to go into the next month, or actually, I know I still want to do it, but I don't know when, then they go back into the future log. And that's it. That's the entire flow. So as you can see, it is much, much simpler than something like the DTD system. It's a little bit more complex than some of these other methodologies we've seen, but it really all just follows the idea of making sure that everything is chronologically organized. The things that you're doing today are coming from the monthly log, and the things in the monthly log are coming from the future log if they were dumped in there. So the idea is that things organically get scheduled if they don't have a specific due date. It also forces you to decide whether you actually want to do these things or get rid of them, so you're not constantly having to drag them from month to month or day to day. So now before we wrap up, let's talk a little bit about some of the benefits. And one of the main benefits is that it's an all-in-one system. It is a planner, a diary, and a notebook, and a task list all in one. So if you're used to having multiple applications or putting things in different places, I like to take my tasks and put them down in sticky notes. But if I have a great idea, I'll go put them in a little black idea notebook. And then if I have events, I'll put them in my calendar. The bullet journal system really unifies them and tries to put them all in one single place. So if you're someone that struggles having to juggle all these different systems, or you're someone like myself that captures them, but then you forget to look at them, then keeping everything in one single location might actually be a really good way to make sure you don't miss some of these things. Another benefit is that it's very simple because it was designed to be done inside of a paper notebook. The only real pieces are the modules, the sections, and the little symbols that indicate what things are. It's very flexible, but there is a system there to help you keep track of things you need to do and when you're supposed to do them. Another benefit you might have gotten a sense for as I was going through and explaining the system is that by marking these tasks with the little arrows and having to decide when to move these things and where you're actually going to schedule them, it really forces you to decide what things you're going to spend your time on and what things you're not going to care about anymore because they're just no longer relevant or not important. Otherwise, what's going to happen is you're going to end up creating a lot of little right-hand arrows and dragging a bunch of tasks over day after day. And so it really does force you to decide, are you actually going to do this? If so, do it or schedule it. If not, get rid of it and cross it off. Because unlike a to-do list where it can just eternally grow, each day you're starting a new page, you have to decide what you're going to put on that page. And if you're constantly dragging things that you haven't completed from the past day, it's going to become really apparent that you're not following up on the things you're supposed to be doing or you told yourself you were going to do. And so that just ties in with this next one here, which is around helping to filter noise and focusing on priorities. You are having to manually sort those tasks and figure out what you're going to do today, what things that you didn't finish yesterday are you going to work on today, in what order. And so overall, I think it just helps you to be really conscious about what you're working on any given day and why. And because the system is very simple, just a couple of symbols and a couple of sections, you can expand it with collections. You can add your own symbols. You could add filters and sorting and tags and all kinds of things. So in the box, you get just a couple of features, but it's pretty flexible and it allows you to do a lot with it. And because there are not a lot of rules other than just making sure things that are scheduled for the future eventually get sorted into what month, and then they eventually trickle down to what day, there's a lot of flexibility and it allows you to modify the system in case you work in a very specific way or you want to track things in a way that makes more sense to you. So very simple, but it can be expanded and easy to modify. And now let's jump into the demo. So the way that I would do it in something like Workflowy is because we have just one document, I would just put them in here. No need for an index. So I would have my daily log like this. I would organize my tasks using the date tags. I would actually use the to-do feature just because it's easier than writing an X, but you can do it either way. And then you could decide to go with the original paper way of doing this. So for example, review budget that I wanted to do tomorrow. You could mark it with the little right-hand arrow and then just duplicate it and dump it into tomorrow. And that would be sticking very close to what the original paper version is. It would also leave a digital paper trail of when you decided to move this to tomorrow, or you could choose to use technology and then do something like creating a mirror so that when you, let's say, do something like that, this is not actually tomorrow. Let me actually make it tomorrow. There we go, tomorrow. Then when I complete this, it's going to be completed everywhere else. You could do it either way, whichever makes the most sense for you. If you want to keep it very close to the original system, then you could just use the little right-hand arrow, duplicate it and dump it into tomorrow. Or you could use mirrors in Workflowy, and that would be another way to do it. And then for the month, I would just organize them under months. Anything that has a specific due date, I would just dump in here with a date tag. Things that don't have a specific due date, I would just leave like that so that when I do my review and then have to decide on what day I actually want to do these things or if I want to do them at all, The future log is essentially just a bucket for each month. And so you would put the months here in a list. And then when you decide you want to do something next month or a specific month, you just dump them in here. And then this is when you review each month, you would look into the future logs, see these items here, and then decide if I'm actually going to do them in October. And if so, give them a due date. And last but not least, we have our collection. So like I said, this could be things like books to read, tracking your fitness, tracking personal projects, hobbies, anything you want to focus on that doesn't quite align with the more chronologically focused daily log and monthly log. But you still want to keep things organized in one single digital journal. And so that's basically it. It's a very simple system. With just a couple of modules and a little bit of use of symbols, you can get pretty organized. So if we take a look at the little productivity system chart that I have here, bullet journaling is the first system that we have in this right-hand bottom quadrant, which are the systems that I would consider offer a bit more of a thorough approach and are more process-oriented, not so much just worrying about individual tasks. And it's where they have some sort of a set process that you need to follow. So it's not quite as simple as just marking things off a list or moving things across a board. You do need to make sure that you are following specific processes in a specific way. But really, it's just doing a couple of things at the start of each day and then once a month to make sure all those things get sorted from the future log into the monthly log into the daily log. If you're someone that's already interested in journaling or is already doing that in some way, or maybe you have multiple applications that you use, or you're mixing digital media with physical media, like you have a paper notebook, you use sticky notes, you have a task tracker application, then trying to put things into one single system might be a really good way to unify everything and save you from having to switch and check a bunch of different applications and also deal with paper notes. If you're someone that already keeps things scattered across different applications and on your desk, putting them in one single place could be a really good way to reduce the amount of context switching from all the different apps to the different notebooks, and keeping everything nice and unified in one single journal. So I think as long as you're already doing a little bit of that, it's hard to go overboard. As we saw in the beginning, bullet journaling is like a mindfulness practice that is disguised as a productivity system. And the reason for that is because we have all these different sources of information in one single place. You have your tasks living next to your notes, next to the events, and you're having to constantly sift through those and move them around and decide what you're going to do, when you're going to do it. And at the same time, you're looking at all the different notes you're taking, all the information that's coming in, any interesting things that happened, anything you learned, anything you want to remember for your future self. And so now we're starting to go beyond just being productive. And really what we're trying to do is get a more holistic picture of all the information that's coming in and we're having to deal with on a day-to-day basis. This could be a really good way to then feed into any kind of creative outlet. You begin to see connections across the different things you're doing, what you're learning, because all that information is no longer scattered. It's intermingling, it's sitting right next to each other, and you're seeing it day to day. And so if either your personal or professional work requires you, or you would like to have a way to generate some of these ideas to constantly be inspired, and you like to explore interesting ideas, then something like the bullet journal system could be a really good way to do that, because it forces you to keep everything together. And it just naturally lends itself to having these ideas spring up. And so it becomes this really fertile soil for new ideas and new explorations to start. So the one thing I would say is if you are looking for something to just be productive or just manage your time or your focus, then probably this might be a bit overkill for you. At the start of the series, when I mentioned the different quadrants in the systems, this quadrant in particular, I mentioned something like this is when you start to go beyond needing a little bit of help to stay organized, and you want to do something more with the information that you're working with on a day-to-day basis. You want to take your knowledge and your learnings and combine them and use it as a sort of an engine for your creativity. So if you're struggling to just get the basics done, it might be a bit distracting. I would maybe recommend some of the other simpler systems and start with those. And if you feel good, then maybe move on to something like bullet journaling. Could always just jump straight into that if it seems interesting, because as with all these productivity systems, they're only going to work as long as you do them. And so if these maybe are more useful, but they're a little too simple, a little too boring, and something like the bullet journal system appeals to you more, and it's going to get you to stick to the system, even if it's a bit more complicated and it's actually going to require more from you, then it might actually be the best system to go with. So it really depends on your particular case. And in terms of rating the systems, this is one that I would recommend. Maybe I wouldn't give it the highest rating possible because we are focused on productivity systems. And this one I feel strays a little bit from that. It can be really useful, but it has particular uses, and it really depends on the type of person you are, the type of information you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. If you require something like a creative idea engine, then this could be really productive and useful for you. If not, you just want to do basic things and organize your tasks and be on time and things like that, then maybe this isn't going to be the most useful thing. And so that's why my rating is somewhere in the middle. It really depends on who you are. This could either be incredibly useful or just overly complicating your day-to-day task tracking. And so that's it for the bullet journal system. I hope you learned a thing or two and maybe were inspired to try this out in either the paper format or a digital application. It's a very simple system, just a couple of symbols and a couple of sections, and it can help you get organized pretty quickly. So be sure to like and subscribe if you haven't already, so you don't miss my next productivity system overview. So I will see you in the next video.